Hello. The numbers ticking up. We've got people from Conway, Van Buren, Roland. This is great. If you get a chance, say hello, tell us where you're watching from in the chat box. So welcome to the August 2020 Legacies and Lunch, a program of CAL's Butler Center for Arkansas Studies. I'm Heather Register Zabindon, Outreach Coordinator for the Bobby L. Roberts Library for Arkansas History and Art. The Roberts Library is located downtown Little Rock, across Rock Street from the main library, and houses the galleries at Library Square, the Butler Center for Arkansas Studies, and the Encyclopedia of Arkansas. The Roberts Library Research Room and the galleries at Library Square are now open on Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays from 9 to 11 and 1 to 5. Those early time slots are exclusively for high-risk populations. Like other CAL's branches, we are limiting the number of patrons in the building at one time. We ask that you call ahead and make an appointment to reserve your spot in the research room or the galleries at Library Square. For patrons wishing to use our closed stacked materials, you must request your items at least 2 business days in advance. Please go to robertslibrary.org for all the specifics before planning your visit. For details about other CAL's branches and the days and times they are open, please go to cals.org or call the specific branch. We will continue doing a lot of virtual programming for the foreseeable future. Library programs include story times, cooking classes, craft activities, and fun podcasts. You can find most of these programs archived on CAL's YouTube channel. Just go to youtube.com and search for the Central Arkansas Library System. Subscribe to the channel to get notifications of when the latest videos are posted. And follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram to fill your feed with interesting, fun, and educational content. One of the things that we're doing at Roberts is collecting your stories, photos, and art related to the COVID-19 experiences of Arkansans. We did a similar collecting initiative last year during the Arkansas River flood. So please go to robertslibrary.org for more information or to submit your photographs and stories. We want to hear from you. Your story is important to Arkansas history. Now, a little bit of Zoom housekeeping. The speaker will answer questions at the end of the session. Please type your questions in the chat box, not the Q&A. And for a lot of people, the chat, you go to the 3 dots on the right side of your Zoom toolbar and open up the chat there. But if you have tech questions or issues, such as volume or lag or something like that, then you can put those questions for me in the Q&A, and I will try and help you the best I can as soon as I'm done talking. So today's program, that's what you came for. This year, 2020, marks the 50th anniversary of the publication of Dee Brown's Burying My Heart at Wounded Knee. For me, as a high school junior, this was required reading. And that single assignment contributed more than I will ever realize to my chosen profession as a public historian. The Central Arkansas Library System and the Bobby L. Roberts Library for Arkansas History and Art are celebrating the anniversary of this American classic with a series of lectures and exhibitions that recognize the enduring importance and power of Brown's groundbreaking volume. This program is made possible by a grant from the Division of Arkansas Heritage, funded by the 1/8 cent conservation sales tax, Amendment 75. For more details about all of our celebration events, go to cals.org. So thank you for joining us for this kickoff event. The celebration will really go for a couple of months, and so this is the inaugural event. We invited award-winning Native American journalist Paul DeMain to discuss his involvement in covering the activities of the American Indian movement that were occurring around the same time that Brown's book was published, and DeMain's investigations into the aftermath of controversies surrounding the movement. Paul is a member of the Oneida Nation of Wisconsin and of Ojibwe descent. A member of the Bear Clan, he led the Native American Journalists Association for several terms as president and was chairman of the Unity Coalition, Journalists of Color, during the same time period. These organizations reviewed the criminal case of Leonard Peltier and the murder of Annie Mae Aquash. He is the former editor of News from Indian Country. He was the campaign manager for Green Party vice presidential candidate Winona LaDuke in 2000, and once served as a policy advisor for Wisconsin Governor Anthony S. Earl. Paul currently is a video producer for IndianCountryTV.com and chairman of the board for the Indigenous environmental group Honor the Earth. So please take a minute and give a warm virtual welcome to Paul DeMain. And now, if you'll give me just a second, we'll get these transitions going. Okay. Okay, Paul, I've asked you to start your, there we go, and unmute, yay. That worked lovely.
It all happened and it worked.
It did, you're good. So now you should be able to share your screen. It's a green button at the bottom.
Let's see how that works.
There we go.
All
and
right.
There it is. And now I'm going to disappear and let you take over.
Okay, thank you very much, Heather. I appreciate that. As she introduced me a little bit there, I'm going to do a traditional opening. So in Dinaway Maganaduk, Skabewis Indigeni cause. Skabewis is my Ojibwe name, meaning the messenger. I'm a member of the Oneida Nation of Wisconsin and a descendant of Ojibwe country and the Oneida Bear Clan. And thank you so much for the invitation. And we'll see how this goes today. I hope that it strikes some interest in those interested in Wounded Knee, both historically and the contemporary history that has occurred there since Dee Brown published Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee. And again, my general impression about the book itself, which was mandatory reading material in my college classes as well, is that in a certain way, as a journalist, I think I've relived all the activities and events that were packed into that book and some of the misery. Certainly Indian country has the good, the bad, and the ugly, and we need to balance that out. But Wounded Knee kind of stands out as a location of great importance to the history of the relationship between the United States and Indigenous people, and continues to be that symbolic entity that asks the question, you know, how do we treat the original inhabitants of the North American continent? So as we move along, I'm not sure if Heather is going to ask me those questions or if I need to look at chat later on, but I'll check back in chat later on and see if there's some questions, and Heather can decide if she wants to forward me some questions. But let's go ahead and move on with this presentation. There is the remarkable Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee, Indian History of the American West. If you've read it, you understand exactly how Indigenous people can feel. Like I said, we've got both the misery of our history, but certainly a lot of very positive events here in the last 25 to 50 years. starting in the 1950s with voting rights, civil rights, particular legislation, enhancement of tribal governments, candidates running for office on the political arena, the growth of tribal government, the reestablishment of jurisdiction, and all those things that come with sovereignty and exercising rights of government and those rights that were retained in treaties with the United States. It doesn't surprise me then, I guess, that when President Trump visited Mount Rushmore on July 4th, that there was a protest by members of the Pine Ridge, Rosebud, and Cheyenne River Sioux reservations. If you were to pick a place for a prominent politician to visit that can be sure to provoke the indigenous community, and especially those people amongst the Lakota, Nakota, Dakota, and Assiniboine Sioux making up the Great Sioux Nation, going to praise the United States at Mount Rushmore is a place that's going to get exactly the reaction that our current president got, and that was people up there protesting his presence there. I just don't know how this feels to the Great Sioux Nation and its citizens. This was a very sacred place in the very beginning of time. It's revered by some 20 different Indian nations and groups in the Western Hemisphere as a sacred site. And yet our president chose this location to make his presentation on a very special day, the celebration of the United States in July 4th, something that many indigenous people, while they shoot off fireworks, have very, very mixed feelings about. So this is my number one mapping here, the 1851 Fort Laramie Treaty. This was submitted into the Indians Claims Commission and was established as the legal basis for litigation and compensation for an illegal taking. There were a number of treaties struck around that time called the Treaty of Fort Laramie. There was one, I think, 17 years later on April 29th, 1868. This treaty came with some interesting provisions, but you can already see how some of the boundaries have been eroded based on claims from other tribes. You have the purple area in the middle that ends up being the Great Sioux Reservation or the reserved territory after that treaty of April 29th. You can see the unceded territory around that area that was ceded in the Treaty of 1868, and the formation of what's going to be reservation areas in that Great Sioux Reservation area, including the Black Hills. I threw this up as the Battle of the Little Bighorn, June 1876, that raised tensions amongst all the parties involved in that. And that led to this in the same year. You can see that already the Great Sioux Nation mapping is now broken up into proposed reserved areas, Pine Ridge at the bottom, Rosebud at the bottom, Standing Rock and Cheyenne River Sioux on the upper part of the Great Sioux Nation reserved areas. And this occurred around the time of the seizure of the Black Hills. And so here's a color picture of what occurred, the original treaty, the Great Sioux Nation reserved land mass, and then the dark red areas, those reservation areas that were left over for confinement of tribal citizens of the Sioux Nation, and basically a seizure of land without compensation. And if we went back to this original treaty here, one of the interesting things of the April 29th, 1868 treaty is that in order to consent to that treaty, they needed to have 75% of all male voters of the Great Sioux Nation consent to that. And there are plenty of people that would attest to the fact that that did not occur. So there is the reservations in color as they were after the Great Sioux Nation breakup and the establishment of the reservations. When you look at the upper corner of that, you can see Bismarck up in the upper right-hand corner. That's this area here. Bismarck is in yellow. And you see some of the modern day issues that are confronting Indian country in regards to environmental racism and other issues. The dotted line running along the top part is the original proposed Dakota Access Pipeline. Because of objections from people in the Bismarck area, including politicians and citizens who were concerned about the potential of an oil leak north of Bismarck, the final Dakota Access Pipeline was established running south of Bismarck and through unceded territory seized by the United States government. And so on the very lower end there, you see the Standing Rock Sioux Reservation and the proximity of the Dakota Access Line there in black. And there are two red spots on there that are marked for significant sites, archaeological sites, as they got close down to the Lake Ahu area there. And the whole history of even the seizure of the lands, the farmlands by the Army Corps of Engineers and the US government in order to flood that area is something that is significant and consistent with everything that has occurred here in the history. The protests were anticipated protests. The minute I heard about this situation, I figured that there would be problems around this. So Standing Rock, Awaken the World. If you look in the background, thousands of people camping at Standing Rock. This is the day that the Army Corps of Engineers pulled out of they put the Dakota Access Permit online, saying that they needed to provide a full environmental economic impact statement. That environmental impact statement is still not done, has led to some recent court decisions in which a judge has ordered that the line be shut down completely and emptied of oil until that environmental impact statement is completed. This is the day that the Army Corps put that permit on hold. I believe it's December of 2016, and people formed a ring around the Dakota Access Camp. Some pictures of that camp during the winter of 2016 and 17, where thousands of people did through the winter. One of the most infamous nights, a protest on the bridge on the Cannonball River, in which thousands, hundreds of protesters anyway, in the middle of the night in temperatures down in the 40s and 50s were doused with water and chemical irritants to disperse them. Some people are still suffering from lung damage and broken arms and other things from the missiles and projectiles that were sent out that night on that bridge. This is kind of the reputation that North Dakota got in 2016, celebrating Native American Month with their law enforcement officers and other organizations, the Dakota Access Organization, Enbridge, Sunoco, which bought into it, purchased counterintelligence, counterterrorism organizations that had previously worked in Iraq to conduct surveillance on Facebook and other sites and to infiltrate protesters. And some of those people were involved in activities that led to the dismissal of hundreds of cases against the water protectors that went there. So let's get back to this. That kind of sets the stage for modern day feelings in a way, but this is the historic view that a lot of people remember. I remember seeing these postcards. This is the mass grave after the Wounded Knee Massacre in 1890 on December 29th. This site became a site that'll be a memorial site forever for many reasons. This is Chief Bigfoot, frozen out at Wounded Knee, South Dakota in 1890. He was interned in that gravesite as well. Here's a composite of that same site. On the left side, upper side, is a picture of that mass gravesite. On the bottom lower left, that's a picture of the modern day site for that mass grave, along with Chief Bigfoot's memorial. And on the outside of the fence are people from the community that's been buried there in more recent years. One of the newer grave sites is on the right side there. That's the grave site of Buddy Lamont, a Vietnam veteran and a member of the Pine Ridge Reservation Sioux, very prominent family at Pine Ridge, who is buried there. The saying on his headstone says 2,000 came and went, but only one remains. However, there are individuals who were involved in that occupation who say that Buddy Lamont was not the only one that was left there from the 1973 event. This is the church that previously sat at the southern end of that cemetery, Catholic church. This is during the takeover. It's pixelated a little bit, so you can't see things very clear because I had to enlarge it, but those are sandbags and bunkers surrounding that church. That church burned down at the end of the occupation and has since been rebuilt on the northern end of the mass grave. And for those people that have visited there, it's a quaint little church that's located there on top of a bluff overseeing Wounded Knee, South Dakota. This is Nogijik Aquash and Annie Mae Maloney. She ends up marrying Nogijik Aquash from Wappo Island in 1973 while in Wounded Knee. She goes there and refuses to join the women in the kitchen. She decides that she's going to be involved in security and construction. And Nogijik is one of the main security people at Wounded Knee during that occupation. And Annie Mae and Nogijik Aquash got married toward the end of that 73-day occupation. There she is in a photo by Kevin McKiernan, someone who covered a lot of activities at Wounded Knee and of the American Indian Men over the years, helping build a bunker. And both the fact that Nogijik Aquash is involved at the highest levels of security at Wounded Knee on behalf of the leadership of the American Indian movement, and Annie Mae's involvement in the upper level of the American Indian leadership as a female leader brought them knowledge of what was occurring in the village around security issues. We know that Leonard Peltier was not at Wounded Knee, South Dakota in 1973 during the occupation. He was incarcerated in Milwaukee, Wisconsin on an attempted murder charge that he was later acquitted of for pointing a gun, a loaded gun at off-duty Milwaukee police officer that was teasing him and giving him a hassle in a bar. He pulled out a gun and pulled the trigger. The gun did not fire. The gun was later to be found to have a broken trigger, and Peltier's defense team, Peltier didn't take the stand, argued that he didn't know that, or he knew that it was a broken gun and was not working. Shortly after the trial, one of the people on the legal team that defended Peltier years later, in fact, in the last 10 years, called me up and said, look, this is what happened after the trial. Peltier admitted to us that he didn't know that the gun was broken. And so they presented a case on false premises at that time. Peltier wasn't there, but in 1994, as Heather indicated earlier, I was the president of the Native American Journalists Association. I was also the chair of the Unity Coalition, which was made up of over 7,000 members of the Black, Hispanic, Native American, Asian American, Gay and Lesbian Journalists Associations, the world's largest organization, as its chair. We mainly passed resolutions initially regarding freedom of information documentation that various government agencies were holding back on and highly censoring, trying to see if we couldn't get some of the redactions reduced so that we could see one of the most complete collections of American Indian contemporary activity is in the FBI files. I guess they're now in several locations in the United States on microfiche, in addition to the Washington, D.C. reading room, where me and several members of the Native American Journalists Association went to examine those. There's something like 72,000 documents in those files. petitions from the Gun Lake Potawatomi Band trying to exercise their fishing rights in Michigan with all the people who signed it. Our information about who's heading up the National Council of Churches Native American Outreach Organization, because the FBI was searching for all those tracks and trails on what the American Indian movement was doing in 1973. And if you want to know that there's a vegetarian chapter of the American Indian movement in Oklahoma in 1973, you can read about it in the FBI files. So we brought resolutions in regard to freedom of information mainly, but there was a general drive amongst the Native American Journalists Association to launch a review of Leonard Peltier's case to see if we could find out not only the legal construct of the trial and the documentation, but certainly we were looking to see if we could figure out who it was that actually shot those agents that people claim that Peltier did not. We also decided as a secondary intent of that investigation was to review the documentation on the execution murder in early 1976 of Annie Mae Aquash. And there was claims that the FBI was complicit in that, or that the goons on the Pine Ridge Reservation, the goons are the guardian of the Oneida Nation. That's the acronym that they took when people started calling them goons. They were a kind of a paramilitary force of deputized individuals without training, as government money and federal money poured into the Pine Ridge Reservation, both in response to the 1973 occupation, but what was occurring with the American Indian movement at Jumping Bull Compound in 1975. We decided that we were going to set up a review of the case and take a look at Annie Mae Aquash's case as well. One of the things that I want to note here very quickly is that in the very early parts of the investigation, we noticed a distinct difference between how people related to Annie Mae Aquash. Many of the male leaders in the leadership and other people would call her Annie Mae Aquash. And that's basically how the FBI related to her as well. You'll see her name spelled with an A on the end. She, in interviews, says, "My name is Annie Mae Aquash." And people like John Trudell, who are very, very close to Annie Mae, and other people who were her friends call her Annie Mae. And we could tell how close the relationship was with people by how they pronounced her name. They either called her by the name she held, or they called her Anna. And if they claimed that they knew her very well, we could tell that there was some deception going on there, because otherwise they would have called her Annie. Annie Mae Aquash and Kamuk Nichols, married to Dennis Banks in 1974, 1975, were well known to each other. In the very early parts of our investigation, we discovered in part that the investigation folded itself into the same investigation. While we decided to look at the case of Annie Mae and the case of Peltier separately, what we found out is that in their travels that they were very close to each other. They were very much dedicated to Dennis Banks. Leonard Peltier, again, was in Milwaukee in 1973. He was at the Jumping Bull Compound on June 1975. The Marlowe Brand motorhome bus where Annie Mae and Kamuk Nichols were arrested was in November of 1975. They're now on the run from the shooting in June of 1975. Peltier flees to Canada in 1976, and he's arrested at Small Boys Camp in February 6th of 1976. So he's on the run for approximately 90 days during that time period after the shooting at the Jumping Bull Compound in June of 1975. This is a picture after the Marlowe Brando motorhome bus. They picked up Brando's motorhome in California, and someone drove it back to South Dakota. Dennis Banks was picked up, Leonard Peltier was picked up, Annie Mae Aquash, and another person by the name of David Hill. David Hill and Leonard Peltier are the primary right and left hand bodyguards of Dennis Banks during that time, and those individuals being Leonard Peltier and David Hill are very close to wherever Dennis Banks is from June of 1975 up until and into 1976. So they're traveling as a group, and so their history becomes coexistent to each other, where you find one, you find the others close by. And this is Annie Mae and Aquash Banks on their way to jail in Portland, Oregon after the bust. Aquash is sent, both of them are actually sent back to stand trial on other charges. Another person that we know is in Wounded Knee. Both Aquash and Annie Mae were in Wounded Knee. Aquash was there, is where she pretty much met Dennis Banks, and her and her sister, Bernadine Nichols, at that time, who was then with the partner of Robert Robidoux, the other co-defendant of Leonard Peltier at trial that was acquitted earlier. Both him and Dino Butler in 1977 were acquitted on grounds of self-defense while Peltier was in Canada. The other person we know that was definitively in Wounded Knee, because we've interviewed some 23 people that we've got on our list have admitted they saw him there and related to him in a different way, was a Black civil rights worker by the name of Perry Ray Robinson. And just checking my time, you can read about him in articles about Barb Deming's Cuba blockade march in the 1960s from Montreal to Florida. Perry Ray Robinson was arrested in Georgia when they wouldn't let the marchers come through town. They were forced to the streets, but Perry Ray Robinson was arrested along with, I think, Barbara Deming in the car, along with another AIM activist later on by the name of Al Cooper, for a white woman being in a car with a Black driver at that time, and they were held in jail down there. So you can find out more about that, about Barb Deming. She was an outed lesbian after this. Her father was a very prominent Republican. There's an entire file on the East Coast. I don't have that data in front of me, but if people are interested in it, there's a file on Barbara Deming's activities, but there's a special section on Perry Ray Robinson Jr. Has a very interesting history of growing up in the Washington, D.C. area. And he went to Detroit, Michigan to live for a while. He became a boxer and basically said in his own words, I became a boxer so I could legally beat up white people because I was so angry at them. That anger led him into the peaceful activities of Martin Luther King, where he marched with Andrew Young and Jesse Jackson and other leadership people. This picture in the upper left-hand corner is his arrest at the Supreme Court justice on a day they were protesting, I believe, during the Poor's People's March in Washington, D.C. in 1968. He then went to Madison, Wisconsin, where he met a white woman from Sparta, Wisconsin, which was an ironic find in this investigation, a family that lives about 2 hours south of me here, and married her, trained at UW-Madison for voter registration and other activities, and then left for Mississippi, where he was living in 1973 with his wife, Cheryl Buswell Robinson, and those are two of his children. He did not leave Wounded Knee by all accounts. And so in this general investigation of Peltier's activities from 1975, as we began interviewing people, did not take very long for us to start getting names about people who were involved actually in the execution of Annie Mae Aquash. And I wanted to say that one of the first things that we did in analyzing this, and the team was made up of Richard LaCourse, a Yakima journalist who used to work for the William Randolph Hearst newspaper chain in San Francisco. He was William Randolph Hearst's first Indian. Richard would often tell us that Hearst would show up maybe once a week and says, here's my Indian guy. He's the first Indian journalist we've had. But he helped set up the investigation in a way that we were definitely made to research the information. So when I got information about a black guy being killed in Wounded Knee, I wrote all the information down and put it on the side. It wasn't until I was interviewed a second person, was independent of the first person, that we were then allowed perhaps to use the material in an article. The New Country team included also Minnie Two Shoes and Assiniboine Sioux from Montana, member of the American Indian Movement, a member of the Pie Patrol. The Pie Patrol was kind of given to women in the movement by the men. It's because they were in the kitchen baking and everything, and pie was kind of a joke, but the women took it up and called themselves part of the Pie Patrol. Minnie Two Shoes was part of it. It was a part of the leadership, female leadership. So you'll find Madonna Gilbert, a prominent name, Oreilles Dakota, and other women who were involved in the Pie Patrol. It was their own secondary kind of organization within the organization. So Perry Ray Robinson was in Wounded Knee, and I was told they didn't come out. This was probably in 1994 when we launched this investigation. It probably wasn't until 1996 that we began hearing consistently about the black man. This is Leonard Peltier. I put him up here, and I took this picture because during this investigation, we talked to an Ojibwe spiritual leader of the American Indian Movement who said members of AIM came to them to ask him what the status of an informer would be, a known informer who is working with the police. Could he be considered an enemy, and could he be executed, or could he be sanctioned? And this individual's advice simply was, if you're thinking about executing an informer as an enemy, when you have blood on your hands, you have blood on your hands. These individuals in the American Indian Movement then turned away from this individual and went to Leonard Peltier, who Peltier declared that informants were enemies of theirs, and because that was a state of war, you could execute them and get away with it, I guess. So this is a spiritual advisor that some other spiritual people have very little to do with because of the history of what happened at Wounded Knee. Was one of the leaders of the American Indian Movement. He was working for Honeywell when the movement was started in Minneapolis in 1968, suit, coat, and ties. He became a prominent spokesman for AIM in the Minneapolis. He married Kamuk Nichols and has 4 children by him. He has 28 children by 24 different women in Indian country. So with the Me Too movement going on, I suspect that some people are going to be looking at some of those relationships, but that's a leadership role. Russell Means is a member of the Pine Ridge Reservation and of Crow descent. He's a founder of he's not so much a founder as one of the 3 major leaders. The founders were in Minneapolis. There was about 8, and there was about 3 or 4 women that helped founded the American Indian Movement. The legacy of the women founding AIM kind of got stuck in the background all these years. Russell Means was one of the 3 prominent leaders, being Dennis Banks of Ojibwe country, Russell Means of Lakota country. A lot of people saw that as a historic alliance after years and years of feuding between those movements. Russell was a dance instructor in Cincinnati, Ohio in the 1970s. Clyde Bellecourt on the left, Vern Bellecourt on the right, his older brother. Clyde was considered the 3rd major leader in the American Indian Movement. Clyde spent most of his life in and out of jails for petty crimes. Vern Bellecourt was a hairdresser in Denver, Colorado in 1968. He became the major spokesman and PR person, very elegant person. I worked with him for many, many years doing all kinds of PR things, but he became the person who changed white into black, black into white. He told me at the chair at his kitchen table one day, he says, when Peltier shot the agents, just like that, I was the one that had to turn it out. And we said the FBI framed him and Peltier was innocent, and I'll be darned. In 1975, everyone was willing to believe us. He says, but that's off the record, Paul. Don't be telling anyone about it. He's passed away. Clyde's still alive in Minneapolis. There's Russell Means, and I want to give a couple 2-minute videos here quickly because I think it's AIM leaders in their own words speaking. This was the first break in the story from AIM leaders after we began writing our series about what we learned. We made the accusation that we thought Peltier was guilty of shooting the agents he was convicted of killing. And that was mainly because Richard LaCourse deconstructed about 15 different alibis of Peltier, declaring him a liar, saying that all the things that Peltier has said at different times in the last 25 years could not be true. He's a liar, and I believe because of that, he's probably guilty of the crimes. But let's listen to Russell Means for 2 minutes or less.
It's always curious to me why the federal authorities have refused to cooperate in the investigation into Annie Mae Aquash's death. There's been 2 federal grand juries, and of course Denver police. They all know the names of the perpetrators of the murder. They know the houses that Annie Mae was taken to. They know the house in Denver where she was kidnapped from. They know all of the things that, they know more than I do. And yet nothing has come about.
As far as I'm concerned, by March of 1976, Dennis Banks, John Trudell, Clyde and Vernon Belcourt, and yes, Leonard Peltier were exactly aware of what happened to Annie Mae.
The reason I called for this press conference and my participation is to tell the world about the leadership of the American Indian movement at that time. Well aware of Annie Mae, and 2 of the leaders ordered her death. Vernon Belcourt made the phone call to the house on Rosebud, which brother's house. And Clyde Belcourt took the call from Vernon, then issued the order for her death, her murder.
The only thing I want to note on that is that this is an hour-and-a-half long press conference. This is 2 minutes from it. At the end of the conference, he says he has all kinds of information, and the FBI and South Dakota won't call him to a grand jury. They called him. South Dakota did convene a grand jury shortly after that. Russell Means was called to there's missing an L in his name. He was called to the grand jury, and when he arrived, he asked for immunity from prosecution for his testimony. This is another member of the American Indian Movement, Richard Tuelk. He's a member of the Pine Ridge Reservation and participated in the Wounded Knee action. Excuse me, let's see, I got it.
My name is Tuelk, Richard Tuelk, Oneida Dakota from Pine Ridge, South Dakota. I took up the pipe when I was 17 years old. I sundanced for my brother in 1977. I'm a combat veteran. I was in Wounded Knee. I was in the United States Army. I served actively 1983 to 1987 as a medical NCO. Johnny and Arlo Looking Cloud are the descendants of American Horse. So when we talk about Arlo Looking Cloud, we're not just talking about, as AIM has suggested, some drunk Indian doesn't have a clue. We're talking about descendant of our Lakota headman. I'm here today to address the issue of my brother's involvement in the murder of Annie Mae Aquash. From the time of the murder up until today, Arlo Looking Cloud has been associated with this case. It's also been clear to me that Arlo Looking Cloud, there's no doubt in my mind that he was involved in the murder of Annie Mae. He was always stated to me consistently over the years that he was only acting on orders. He further states that if people want to know more about where those orders came from, how they came about, then they need to talk to the AIM leadership.
In the case of Arlo Looking Cloud, he was one of 23 AIM witnesses that was part of the trial, and that led to the conviction of Arlo Looking Cloud for the murder of Annie Mae. This is John Trudell. He was then the national chairman of the American Indian Movement in 1975. This is from a couple years ago.
Many people were involved in her murdering. Maybe out of ignorance and stupidity and blind loyalties and not having any sense, but they were involved. And we're not, and to try to deny that means that you don't get at the truth.
Jurors needed only about 4 hours to agree that John Graham and 2 other American Indian Movement supporters kidnapped a fellow activist in 1975 and killed her on the Pine Ridge Reservation of South Dakota, one jury member said. But they weren't all convinced it was Graham who pulled the trigger.
Got back in their car, and they took Annie Mae out to where she was found. Parked alongside the road and walked her out to where she was shot. John Boy shot her.
We have known for a long time that these people are involved in her murder. It was a matter of finding the people that had the courage to step up and speak their truth.
I mean, just for me, from a personal sense, see, I know what it's like to have your people killed, and then you never get any answers. And I think her daughters are entitled, and her sister, her family, they're entitled to answers. And in this situation, it may be possible that they can get those answers, but I know what it's like to not have certain questions, that you'll never get answers to some things. So right, all my loyalties are with her.
Those involved in my mother's murder chose to protect the Brotherhood. They lied. They've known for many years what happened to my mother. You know, we listened to testimony of all these witnesses over the last week and a half. People stood up on the stand and say that they were my mother's friends and that, you know, they were trying to protect the movement, and yet in our eyes, the message that they sent to us is that our mother's life had no value when it was compared to the protection of the Brotherhood.
Those were AIM leaders speaking. This is Arlo Looking Cloud. He was convicted of first-degree murder. That's American Horse at Carl Indian School in the middle. There's Arlo. That's his great-grandfather there. Arlo, in a historic way, should be bringing the family flag, war flag, that American Horse carried out in the Dakotas into a powwow, but that's American Horse. This is John Boy Patton Graham, a commission from Vancouver, British Columbia, who was extradited to the United States under federal law. He fought extradition for 2 or 3 years, then fought a jurisdiction of the federal government claiming he wasn't a U.S. definition, and the courts ruled in his behavior on his behalf. He was then released from federal custody only to be arrested. Arlo Looking Cloud spent 10 years in prison from 2004 to about 2014 and was released. John Graham went to state court and was found guilty where life is life. So in South Dakota, he will be in prison for the rest of his life unless something changes. Thelma Rios Conroy Hill, one of the wives of David Hill, the security guy. A lot of people have called David Hill Mr. X, the guy that showed up in some of the articles about Peltier claiming to have shot the agents. Thelma Rios pled guilty to kidnapping and the perpetration of first-degree murder and was passed away shortly after that after serving about 3 to 6 months in jail. So the 3 convictions in the case were Arlo Looking Cloud, John Boy Patton Graham, Thelma Rios. Dick Marshall here was acquitted of providing the gun to John Graham and Arlo Looking Cloud. This is after the acquittal on the left. So we have lots of parties. So what ties this all together? This is Wounded Knee. What I failed to say earlier, that was during the Marlo Brando motorhome, Kamuk Nichols and Bernadine Nichols, both interviewed separately, said that Leonard Peltier confessed to them about shooting both the FBI agents on the day, June 26, 1975. The other woman there was Annie Mae Aquash. But by then there had been people whispering around, including David, Mr. X Hill, his name is David Harry Hill, was actually responsible for spreading those rumors. And so there was a suspicion that Annie Mae was might be going to the FBI. She was picked up in Denver, Colorado, interrogated at the Wounded Knee Legal Defense offices of Bruce Ellison, with Bruce Ellison present in his office, along with Madonna Gilbert, Oreilles, Dakota, and 24 hours later, she was executed, according to the 23 witnesses that testified. So he asked the question, what was the secrets that Annie Mae knew? Was number one, that Peltier had bragged about shooting the agents, and because of her and Oneida Aquash's involvement in Wounded Knee in 1973, we suspect she also knew about the death of Perry Ray Robinson Jr. and his burial ground. These are some testimonies that'll be available on this recording here for people to review. This is Bernadine Nichols talking about being inside Wounded Knee when she was making coffee, and remember the AIM leaders talking about the black man they had killed. Here's another interview below from Vernon Belcourt talking about Annie Mae being a pig, and about another informer by the name of Rocky Duanis, affiliated with the Peltier case, being killed because they thought he was an informant. And near the end of there, they talk a little bit about the black man being killed. He switched to Ray Robinson and said the principals involved were Banks, David Harry Hill, Mr. X, and Carter Camp. So those are two written documentation transcripts from interviews that were conducted. This is a summary. This is actually in a grand jury document that somehow got leaked to me. This is a blow up of that. This is Crow Dog, the guy in the red with blood on his hands, basically talking to a confidential source, a cooperating witness or a confidential witness that is wearing a wire during this investigation. And he starts not talking just about the black guy that's buried at Wounded Knee. He starts talking about the people, the bodies that are there that they got to protect. And we suspect the reason that the black civil rights workers can't be removed from Wounded Knee is because there are other bodies there as well. And we think they're tied to those bunkers that Annie Mae was involved in building some way. These are aerial photographs of Wounded Knee from 1973 on your right, 1968 on the left. We started examining them. The mass grave is on the upper left-hand corner. Here's a topography map that was used by the military. I'm down to about 3 or 4 slides here. In Wounded Knee in 1973 with the bunkers, they become significant here, and I'm just about ready to end. If you look, the mass grave site is up on the right side, Wounded Knee Village down in the middle. None of the houses and clinics and other things, that trading post that used to be there in the middle are there. They're all burned down or torn down. We focused on places that people could be buried that were hidden. We focused on the ravine. And here's a picture that I sent. After about 10 years of this, I actually sent to it a police psychic. I sent this picture and I sent this map. And without telling who the person was or anything about the information, I says, can you tell me where he's buried? Here was the results. Up on the right hand, she sent this back by mail, and when I called her up, she says up at the right hand where the mass grave is, she said she couldn't hardly even go there. She says it was just full of racism and pain and suffering and everything else. But she did select a site down in the middle at the bottom in the middle of the creek. We can see from the files back here that there's a whole bunch of bunkers down on the south. This is the southeast corner of Wounded Knee along Wounded Knee Creek, and that's where she circled, and it coincides with exactly with some of the testimony of people talking about Chris Westerman, Floyd Westerman's brother, taking the body and burying it that evening. So these are the sources. I'm done with my presentation for right now. I'm ready for some questions, and I'm always ready for follow-up from people who are interested.
Thank you so much, Paul. That was very fascinating. I think that I'm speaking for myself, but you know, as somebody who's grown up in the South most of her life, it's a fascinating story. It's a heart-wrenching story. So I really appreciate you sharing this. I've put those links in the chat so people can access the links on that last slide from the chat. They should be able to copy and paste them. So we have one comment from early on in the presentation. she was very happy to see that you use those historical maps to show the land that should have remained in Indigenous hands, but was illegally taken by the U.S. federal government. It should be obvious to us, but it's amazing to me to see such stark evidence of this taking of Indigenous land. So she was very happy to see that. And that I think I told you in our pre-talk, I love a map. It helps so much visually to see where you're talking about, just like, the map where it showed the mass grave and it showed where the church was. I mean, just all of those are so important.
And I got to say this, what you just saw is a clip of a discussion. And we went to South Dakota a few years ago and talked about Wounded Knee. There was panelists all day long and all morning about different aspects. I have 44 linear boxes of material left from the investigation. I've already got probably more than half of that in different archives, like the trial transcript for Leonard Peltier. I didn't want to look at it anymore. Boxes of material, it went away, depositions and everything else. But there are a vast number of documents in this case. There are something like 70 different interview tapes. There is about a dozen VHSs, maybe 20 VHSs. There are interviews that I conducted, interviews that Richard LaCourse conducted, that Minnie Two Shoes conducted, that Candy Hamilton conducted. There's many, many different people. And so we're just scratching the surface of the evidence. And that's why I thought I'd give you the interviews from Trudell talking about AIM involvement, Russ Millings talking about, it's not like, if you go out into the Indigenous community, and if you read Peter Mathiassen's book, I mean, 3 million people signed a petition to free Leonard Peltier. It's because they were said that he was an innocent man, and they really believe this. So this wasn't just a difficult case. This was a case with huge ramifications for tribal people. And Leonard Crow Dog in his interview is talking about 7 people that are remaining in Wounded Knee from 1973. And in the course of reviewing these cases where we concluded Peltier shot the agents and the American Indian movement conspired, the leaders conspired to have Annie Mae executed, is that there may have been at least 13 other murders. Johnny Moore in Lincoln, Nebraska, Jeanette Bissonette across from the Jumping Bull compound, Hobart Horace, and some other unnamed people we don't know in Wounded Knee, even though we have an idea about who some of those people are. So it was a dangerous assignment because you had collectively 35 people that we know who were involved in these several different murders. Whether there's 7 in Wounded Knee and a couple more after that during that era. You had a village of people looking out and listening to who is talking and who is and where they were going. So during the front part of this investigation, Vernon Belcourt called me up every couple of weeks. What are you hearing? Where are you getting at? Where's your investigation and how AIM, the FBI framed Leonard Peltier and how they killed Annie Mae and blaming it on us? And at some collective point, I woke up and says, all the leadership knew about it. It's because we have a puzzle with 1,500 pieces, and it's a puzzle that only takes 1,250. It's not that we have to fill a void. We have to get rid of the lies that have been created and deceptions. And with time, people forgot what their alibis were. And that consistently came up where people were not consistent. If you have an alibi, you have an alibi. If Leonard Peltier didn't do this, he didn't do this on this. He didn't say, well, I ran off to Walmart on that day. And someone said, yeah, Walmart didn't exist until 10 years later. Just, well, it was actually Taco Bell. Those kinds of things lead people to believe that you're not telling the truth.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. We have another question.
Are those in chat?
Oh, they are in chat, yes. Well, we have a comment. Aaron, who I believe this is the same Aaron that works for the Sequoia National Research Center, because she's saying you can find a lot of resources that Paul referenced in the archives at the Sequoia National Research Center at UA Little Rock. And I think that
let me tell you what's there right now. The Loud Hawk case, which is the Marlowe Brando motorhome case, everything other than 2 pieces of that file that Attorney Ken Stearns sent to me. And tell me, I had cooperation from all kinds of attorneys and people. Actually, when this guy Cohen, we got more information than we wanted, but it was very good. That whole file has gone to the University of Little Rock. The next thing that I have to decide to do as I'm entering retirement, because we stop publishing the newspaper next year, is what we're going to do and how we're going to get these files preserved so they're available to the public so people can come down and see the same things we see in a coherent manner. There is a lot of organization to it, but in the last 5 years, there's like 5 more boxes, even though we haven't been active on investigation. I probably picked up another 5 boxes of material, and there's videos, there's books being written. We're going to see a lot more on this. There's no doubt, because it's very controversial. So.
That's great. No, I mean, I'm glad that there will be books and videos written, because it's fascinating. And you're right about the puzzle and the pieces and having too many pieces. It's, but I think a lot of people don't know what we have here in Little Rock with the Sequoia National Research Center. I mean, I went to UALR, and so I knew about it because of being on campus, but it's, you know, it's a huge archive of Native American newspapers and other papers. So yeah, and your stuff is there too, which is great.
Someone fund me to come down here with some boxes, and then I can go to the Flying Fish.
Right. No, I know. I was actually thinking about that at the beginning. I was like, well, when he brings the rest of the boxes down, then we'll get to go to the Flying Fish.
We'll do it someday, no doubt about it.
Someday this pandemic will be over. I have faith.
Look at those 4 links. Those are links to the major documents that are online in videos, historic files, some of them put up by Denise Pictou Maloney. Her daughter was very active. Debbie ended up being a Royal Canadian Mounted Police officer, stays out of sight and out of mind because she is a police officer and can't get involved in this, her mother's case ethically. But Denise is very active, and there's actually a lot of activity around both the Peltier and Aquash cases as we're talking. I mean, it just seems to go through different cycles. And I'm available for questions in the future. Don't overwhelm me, you know, do your studies. I tell people I'm not going to talk to you until you've looked at those links. You've reviewed some of those videos. I've answered some questions 486 times, and I don't want to answer them anymore. Do your basic groundwork if you're really interested in this case, and look at everything you can at the News from Indian Country site and the Justice for Annie Mae race sites at way back, or all the transcripts from the 23 AIM witnesses. A member of AIM coming up and say, you're doing it for the FBI, you're just saying that, isn't the truth. 23 AIM members led to the convictions of Graham and Looking Cloud and Thelma Rios, and many more cooperated at grand jury because this was a burden that they were carrying for many years, and the truth eventually comes out.
Yeah. We have a question, and I think this is coming from Laurel, Maryland. I think this is Mary Morris from Laurel, Maryland. She says, in this time when the Black Lives Matter movement seems to have ramifications for America's indigenous people, for example, the change of the name of the Washington, D.C. football team, can you envision a future in which the American Indian community achieves equal social and economic justice?
Well, yeah, I can envision this. I think society, you know, we've had major victories. I mean, women can vote, American Indians can vote, there's civil rights movements, there's movements for gay and lesbians to equalize their involvement in society. Most of these great social movements end up in a positive way eventually, but we have our ups and downs. But I think we can receive a social justice. I mean, it's hard to believe sometimes in a nation that seems so divided today and so ill mentally, physically, and politically in a lot of ways. But I think we can get there. I think society becomes a better place. And if, as I do, belong to Medicine Lodge and Big Drum and other traditional societies, when the time comes, this is the cleansing of the earth has happened before. In Ojibwe historic stories, it's happened 2 or 3 other times. And the elders are saying, if God decides to cleanse the earth again because human beings are so stupid about how to utilize it and protect it, it'll happen again. And I think that's just something that we've got to be unafraid of, to think that a bat had this kind of an impact on the fossil fuel industry and society as whole tells me that you ought to respect the power of a bat or something. You know, have a little bit of respect for those especially those white-nosed bats that look like they're wearing white masks around, you know. Took one bite of a snake and here we go. So, but I think in the long run, you know, from 1970, the 1970s when Brown's book came out, Indian country has made a tremendous number of momentous milestones in judicial areas, with their own court cases, with their infrastructures, with economies, with revival of language. And all these things are important for the diversity of the United States. I think some indigenous languages are so beautiful that we should never lose them. And so that's a lot of that's coming back. And the question really is can the indigenous community treat all the people who've treated them badly better than they've been treated? I think that's going to be the key to this. You know, how do we turn around and say, look, we can forgive you for being that way, decide, you know, after committing genocide, after pillaging the whole United States and making America great on the backs of black slaves and stolen Indian land. It's not going to quite happen that way again. There's not a whole lot of land to steal from people and make America great again. And you're not going to enslave people, but we're in a troubling time, but I think we can get through it. And I think the Indian community is going to go with it. We have highly educated people. We've got doctors, we've got lawyers, we've got people participating in the U.S. Congress, and they should in the U.S. Senate soon. And maybe we'll have a presidential candidate of Native descent as well in the near future. I look forward to seeing that. Certainly, I would tell my grandchildren that they should look forward to that.
Well, great. Thank you so much, Paul. We really appreciate you doing this and coming and talking to us. I do have a couple of closing announcements. Let me get my screen back up. So next month, Elliot West from the University of Arkansas at Fayetteville will discuss the impact of Brown's book 50 years later. So mark your calendars for Wednesday, September 2nd at noon, and we'll be virtual again. And don't forget to check out all the events we have organized to celebrate the 50th anniversary of Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee, including an exhibition of Native American ledger art from the J.W. Wiggins Native American Art Collection at UA Little Rock. It will open a week from Friday on August 14th in the Cowles Galleries at Library Square, which is part of the Roberts Library. And we're going to have lots of virtual stuff.
Just say ledger art, man. It's a beautiful form of art, man. Go see it. It's really cool how they use it.
I admit I was extremely ignorant about ledger art, and I have learned so much. I'm not the art curator, but I've gone with our art curator to look at the pieces, and it is incredible, the pieces that we have here in Little Rock. So and we're going to do lots of virtual stuff, so you'll be able to see it from Wisconsin. Okay. Oh wait, you're muted.
Yeah, I'll try to participate in it. Thank you for the invitation.
Great. Thank you again, Paul. We really appreciate it. And thanks everybody for attending.
Thank you.